Hi, this is a review of Spanish 4. So the first thing is present tense for the indicative. So this is probably like one of the first things you learned. There's 3 kinds of verbs, AR, ER, IR, and these are the different endings for them. Yo, tú, él, ella, nosotros, vosotros, ellos, and ellas. There are some irregulars for the yo only, and this is just the high frequency verbs. There are more than just this, but these are the most common ones that there are. Dar is doy, conocer is conozco, hacer is hago, poner is pongo, saber is sé, saber, sago, ver, veo, ir, voy. Also, for the present tense, there are some common irregular verbs. Ser, estar, ir, and tener. Whereas ser, you have soy, eres, es, somos, soy, son. Estar, you have estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, están. Make sure you have the accent on the A. For ir, you have voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, van. For tener, you have tengo, tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen. There's also stem changing verbs, and these are just the most common ones. And basically, so querer, it's E to I. So the first E, obviously, you make, oh, sorry, that's actually E to IE, sorry. That's E to IE. So quiere, quiero, for example, empezar, E to IE, and so on. And the only thing, venir is irregular for yo. Also, forgot to say that back here, but that is vengo. Okay, so now let's see. And obviously these are not full sentences, but that's not the purpose of this anyways. Okay, nosotros, so we eat, comemos, that's normal. Mr. Nash reads, lee. I think that's irregular, but it's not. Yo tengo, I have. Yo salgo, those are irregular yos. Él tiene y él es. Vosotros vais. Ella duerme, that's stem changing. Ellos quieren. So, like I said, that's IE, not just E, or not just I. The second thing is preterite. This is basically the past tense, but as you can see, there's another past tense imperfect that we'll talk about then. AR endings are shown. Aste, o, amos, estais, aro. The ER verbs iste, io, imos, istes, iaron. There are a lot of irregulars for the preterite. This is the most complex one that there is. There is first, kargar zar, is some people call it. If a verb ends in kargar zar, for yo only, you change kar to k, gar to gay, and zar to say. There's also karate chop verbs, as some call them, which all this means is that if you ever have a verb where there ends up being 3 vowels and I is in the middle, you have to change it to the Y for third person. And the most common examples are oír. Sorry, that's supposed to be accent mark on that I. Oír, leer, and caer. So as you can see, you don't do oil, oil. That doesn't sound right. So you have to make that I a Y, oil. And this is only for, see where the red is, only for the third person, only él, ella, ellos, ellas. Flip-flops, any verbs that we just talked about that were stem changed in the present tense, only the IR, ER verbs, not AR. If they were a stem changer then they still will be, but it's a little bit different. If they can only be O to U or E to I. So here are examples of verbs that were irregular in the present. So querer, even though it used to be, oh, sorry, that's not a good example because that's very irregular. Forget that. Empezar, that we don't care about that because that's AR. Perder, sorry. We do E to I, and we already did anyways, but I'm just saying if it was E to IE, it's E to I now. And if it was U to, this is a good example, dormir. It is not O to UE anymore, it's just O to U. But all these things, just like for the karate chop, only are for these two pronouns. We have more irregulars. So these are some verbs that are very irregular. Ser and ir are the same in the past tense, and they are fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fuisteis, fueron. Dar and ver are the same, except for they have a V or a D, depending on which one you use. DV, diste, viste, dio, vio, dimos, vimos, vistes, vistes, dieron, dieron. Hacer, hice, hiciste, hiciste, hizo. That one's very irregular. You might think it's hizo, but it's hizo. Hicimos, histes, hicieron. Tener, tuve, tuviste, tuvo. Tuvimos, tuvistes, tuvieron. Now, the Jewies, as I call them, these are just very irregular verbs. They have, but at least they're not super irregular like these. They have common bases. And these are the endings that you use. So these are the bases, these are the endings. They're pretty much like the ER, except you use an E instead of a I with the accent mark. Oh, and also just a O, not a IO. But the thing is, if some of these that have a J on the end, you just have Aaron, not Eron. So Endar and Duv, Vin, Star, Stuv, and so on. You can see these. But for example, for Isir, Dij, if you're doing Eos, you would do Diheron, not Dihieron. So you don't have an I if it has a J. Here, all right, let's see. I ran. That one's normal, Kori. You talked. Abaste, that's normal. A Hugar, that is Kargarzar, see, and it's for the yo. So you have to do Uge instead of well, I don't know how you would even say that, but if you just had a Juge, Ugi, I don't know. That's not what you do. You have to have a U there. And then dormir, we have to do durmio. That since that was a stem changer in the present, we make it not duermio because it's O to U always in the preterite for those. Now for the same thing, but for yo, it is normal because, like I said, that only applies to the third person. Yo is the first person, so it is still just O. Now these are the karate chops, or yo, but it is normal for yo or E, even though that kind of looks weird. There's no Y for that. You don't have to have Y, only for the third person. Now this one's a irregular base, tra heron, and is not traherion, it's traheron. You don't have to have an I when there's a J there. And then ea, and that what I just said, that's only for the eos or as. Ea, dio, that's very irregular, and then nosotros vimos, also very irregular. Imperfect, this is another past tense, but this one, and we'll talk about the difference, that's topic 4, but this is like when you're saying I used to. The AR endings are aba, abas, aba, abamos, abais, aban. The ER, IR endings are ia, yes, ya, iamos, yais, yam. There are only 3 irregulars, luckily. Ir, ser, ver. And they all have common first letters. IB, ER, VE. So iba, iba, siba, ibamos, ibai, siban, era, era, es, and so on. That's what it's like. So that's pretty simple tense. Let's see. I would run, Korea. We would talk. That kind of looks weird. Hablamos. And then this is these next 3 are irregulars. Ibas, Bayan, Erais. Now, the difference between them is pretty simple. Preterite is just a specific time. So you're saying anoche, last night, or yesterday, ayer. It's just a specific time. That's how you know. If you're talking about a specific time of something that you did, that's preterite. Imperfect is something that's like ongoing, meaning it's something that you did over and over, maybe in the past. When I was little, I used to do this, for example. Yeah, it's just like used to. But also, if you're talking about the weather, it was cloudy, you always use imperfect. Same thing for age. I was 10. It was 6 o'clock. You use imperfect for this. All right, let's see. Anoche, yo, what? Did what? Okay. So anoche is a specific time, last night. So we use preterite. Estudei. Now this one, todos los días, that means every day well, that's not a specific time. That's something you did over and over, and it's something you used to do. Every day I would study. Estudiaba. Now this is a kind, like an interruption sentence. I was studying when he yelled. I was studying. You always use imperfect for a sentence like this, but then you use preterite. So that's something you need to remember. When there's something like that with cuando, I was doing this when this happened and it interrupted me. First imperfect, then preterite. Por and para. Okay. This is kind of complicated, but this is what it's like. These are specific differences between them. Generally speaking, you use por for saying because. So if you're saying because, sort of like answering why something happened, you use por. It also could be due to. I did this because of this, due to this, by this. So, and we'll see examples. Para is more of in order to, and or so that I can do this. Usually, if there's infinitives, you use para, but not always, and we'll look at that. But for por, you could use that for duration, how long something took, exchange, through, I went through something, reasoned, this is why I did something, around, cost, thanks. Thanks meaning like any sort of expression, really, like thank you for doing this. That's por. By means of, I walked by foot. Para. So for that one, you can remember the acronym detract B, and this one perfect. Purpose, effect, recipient, like who you gave something to, future dates, employment comparisons, and towards. Okay, so let's look. I worked for 6 hours. This is what we're trying to say. 6 hours is a duration, how long you worked. So you use por. La camisa es, the shirt is for you. If it's for someone, then as a recipient, so you use para tu. I work for Mr. Nash. That's employment, so you use para. Thank you for these pancakes. That's thanks, so you use por. I traveled by train. It's by means of, so por. For a kid, he can draw very good. That's a comparison, so use para. I swim very fast in order to win the contest. In order to, we use para. And you might not have been able to tell that that was in order to, but that makes sense with it because you have that infinitive. And that's what I'm saying. Usually, if there's an infinitive, then you would use para. But I said usually, not always. Look at number 8. I was tired in order to work. That doesn't make sense. It was because I worked. And I know that's an infinitive and you might think to work, but it's not always like that. It's not always simple translations. Like it would mean because I worked. So you would say por. So usually you use para, but if you can tell that it's something like because, then it would be por. Okay. Indirect and direct objects. What are these? These are if you're saying it or to him. So the direct objects are saying what you're replacing. It's kind of, you'll see the examples and it makes more sense, but it is like what, and you replace that with it. You can replace something with it. Now the indirect objects is like giving something to someone. So to who, that answers to who. Now there's pronouns that we use that we replace things with. So we use these so that the sentences can be shorter. So, for example, if I'm saying, I gave her the pancakes, or I gave the pancakes to her, the pancakes are the indirect object because it says what. And to her is the indirect object. So you could say, I gave her them. That's making it shorter. Now the pronouns that we use to replace these words, for the direct objects, it is mete, lola, nos, os, los las. Usually we only use lo or la though, depending on the gender of whatever thing you're replacing. Because if this is what you're saying, I gave her me, I gave her you, that doesn't really make sense. So we don't usually use that much. Now the indirect pronouns is who did you give something to? Me, you. So you can say mete, le, los, os, les. So if you see, it's the same thing for both, except for lo, la, or le, depending on what it is. Now here's a rule that you need to know. If you ever have le beside lo, la, los, or las, you have to change it to se. Remember that. If it's beside that. So how do we use these? And this may not make much sense, but it will when I show you the example. So if you use them individually, so if you only are saying it, or you're only saying her to her, for example, not together, I gave her it, then you you put it before the verb in the sentence, which is pretty simple. That you may already know that, like I gave her or I told her. You may already have done that, but usually we use them together when we're reviewing this. And if you do, you would put them and you would do the indirect object pronoun first, then the direct object pronoun first, before the verb. So person or pronoun, IOP, DOP, verb. Now, if there happens to be two verbs, then you still put them before both verbs, or you smash them on the second verb. And you sometimes have to have accent. Sorry. You sometimes have to have an accent. So let's see. Here's an example. This may make more sense now. So we're just when we use these, we're just shortening sentences. We're replacing things. So this sentence says, I gave the shirts to Dan Arbach. Las camisas is the direct object because it is what? What did you give? And it's not always give, but that's a common thing. What did you give? The shirts. And we replaced them with las. See, that's why we have these tables. We replace them with las, not los, because it has to agree with it. And then Dan Arbach is the indirect pronoun. That's who you gave it to, and you would say lay for him. So like I said, you do pronoun, so yo, and then you do indirect, direct, and then verb. So that's what I did. We had yo. So this is basically just saying, and this may seem out of order, I, him, them gave. That's why this can be confusing, because that seems weird, but this is what you have to do. It's not always a direct translation. So you have to, and by the way, this changed to say, that's that rule. You can't ever have lay by los, lo, or la. You have to change it to say if that happens. So this is the next example is if there's two verbs. Dan Arbach was was taking the shirts far from me or away from me. So the shirts are still a direct pronoun, but Dan Arbach is not the indirect pronoun because this time he's not doing something to someone else, this time no one's giving him something, he's taking something from someone. So me is the indirect pronoun because it's happening to me. So there's two options you can do. As I said, you can put them both before the verbs, or you can smash it on the second verb. In this case, I smashed it on the second verb, and you have to have an accent. So Dan Arbach, we keep that the same. Está tomando melas. That kind of looks weird, but that's what it's like. It's one word, tomando melas. And that A has to have an accent because whenever it's like this, if it's an ando thing, ando or yendo, you count 4 syllables back. Las, me, do, las, me, do, man. And you make an accent on the 4th thing back. If it's not something that's ando or yendo, you only have to do it 3 times. That's kind of a weird rule, but that's what you do. And so that's what it's like. You always have indirect before direct. And all we're doing is we made the sentence shorter, especially for this one. Okay. Present perfect. This is when you're saying, I have something. Not saying you actually have something like, I have a shirt, for example. It is, I have done something. I have walked down this road before, something like that. And you use haber, which also means to have. And here's the conjugations for haber: as, a, hemos, habéis, an. Make sure you don't say ambos for that. Say hemos. And here's what you do. You have the pronoun, then you have the conjugation of haber, then you have whatever verb is the thing that you have done, and you have an ending of ado or ido. Ado for AR verbs, ido for IR ER verbs. The only thing that tells you the only thing that you have to really conjugate is haber, because this is the same for all of them. So here are the irregulars for this. So the red ones are the most common ones, but it's good to know all these. I'm not going to say them, but that's what they are. Okay, let's see. I have eaten. Yo he comido. You do conjugate that, but comido, it would be the same no matter what it is. You have yelled. Tú has gritado. Nosotros hemos abierto. That's the irregular one. And same thing with this one. This is also irregular. Vosotros habéis sido. Okay. Now there can be adjectives with this. This is not, you don't use haber this time though. You use ser or a star, usually a star. So the office is closed, for example. Oficina está cerrada. And you always have to agree with the subject, meaning in gender and plurality or number, whatever. And still ido or ado, depending on er or ir, but it could be ida, idos, idas, ada, adas, adas. So let's see. This one example I have, Den Arbach is lost. Den Arbach está perdido. We do, it's one person, so no S, and it's O because he's a boy. So, okay. Present subjunctive. This is something more like unsure or fluffy ideas. So usually it is, there's two parts of a sentence separated by K. The first part is present, second part is subjunctive, present subjunctive. Here are the endings. And if you notice, it's the same as the present, but it's just switched. So A for ER, ER and IR. And the thing that you have to do is have a base that is the yo base. So there may be irregulars. So remember back on topic 1, any of those irregular yos, they apply here. They're the base for all of them. And if it's them changing, then it is normal for vosotros and nosotros. Here are the very irregular ones. Sides. Ser, ir, dar, estar, saber. Okay, let's see. He doubts that you, and then this is why we would use the subjunctive, is that it says doubt. And also we can see the K here. So it is digas because there is a irregular base, dig, for yo, and then we add on the ending, which is as. Ojalá, if only he would know, or would know, if only he know. So we would use sepa, because this is the irregular one. And now let's just see, what would these verbs be in the irregular, what would these verbs be in the L? Tener, tenga. Ir, vaya, that's irregular. Well, the first one kind of is too, because that's a irregular yo base. And then este, so Those are the very irregulars. The sides are in yellow. Okay, there's also imperfect subjunctive. This one is whenever you have something that's in the past tense. You start out with this and then conditional. If he did this, then this would happen. For example, if you did this, this would happen. Sometimes you can also have like the last thing with the K, but it's preterite or imperfect first. Here's the steps. First, get the aorist preterite form of whatever verb it is, and the irregulars apply. All those irregulars that we already talked about, they apply, so that's why it's important to know that. Drop the RON, and then add this ending. There is also an alternate ending that is SE, but that's not really used anymore, so know this one. Okay, let's see. Okay, if you walked, you would talk. We have to, it would be anduviera, because we first do the eos form. This is irregular, anduvierum, that's what it would be. We drop the RON, so it's just anduvi, and then we add RA as the ending. And this one, he doubted that you would win. And you would say ganaras. This is not an irregular one. And it just happened to be that you would add the AS, but this would really be ganaron if you did the AO's preterite. No more RON, it's just gana and ras. All right, last thing, future and conditional tenses. This is pretty simple. For these, though, you don't take off the AR, IR, or ER, you add this to it, and it's the same for all those kinds of verbs. Future, as, a, hemos, es, on. Yeah, and conditional is the same as imperfect. The only difference is that you're adding it on to it, like I said. And this is like for the IR condition, or IR imperfect. So there are the same irregulars for both. And the red ones are the most common ones. Future is I will do something. Conditional is I would do something. I would run. I will run. I will run future. I would run conditional. These are the irregulars. All right, let's look at an example. And I'm just going to add both because there's no context, so you wouldn't know which one it is. But yo, for hablar, you would do hablare if it was future, and hablaria if it was conditional. See, I didn't take off the AR. I added, because if I did, then that would look like the preterite and the imperfect. You add it to it. Well, it wouldn't look like the imperfect for that one. But Disir, this is irregular. It is dir, dir. So diras, dirias. Thank you for watching.